Hi, I'm Sherry Kendall, and welcome to Hometown Salutes. Today, my Fayette County veteran is John Paul Rathburn. Welcome, John, to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. Were you born and raised here in Connersville?
I wasn't born in Connersville, but my mom and dad moved here when I was about 3, and then they had to move away when Dad was drafted in the Army in World War II, and then they moved back when he got discharged in 1947, and I've lived in Connersville ever since, except for the 20 years I spent in the Navy.
Okay. So did you enlist into the Navy?
I enlisted in the Navy in the fall of '60. A lot of people don't remember, but we were having a kind of a downturn in the economy, and I didn't know what else to do, so I didn't want to go to college, so I just got a few minor jobs around Connersville, and then I finally decided I was tired of doing this, and I enlisted in the service in September 1961.
Okay. And how did you pick the Navy? Because you said your dad was Army?
My dad was Army.
Okay.
In about the 6th grade, I had a cousin from Hamilton, Ohio, who came over to visit Mom and Dad home on boot camp leave from the Navy, and Fred was wearing his white uniform, and I kind of liked that uniform, and I decided if I was going to go in the service, I wanted to be like Fred and wear the white uniform, so I joined the Navy.
Okay. Were your parents supportive that you joined?
I wanted to go in the Navy when I was 17 years old, but my mother wouldn't let my father sign for me, so I had to wait till I was 18 an adult to do it myself.
Okay.
So my mama didn't want me to go in, but after I'd been in the service about 8 years, she said she wished they'd let me go in when I was 17.
All right.
That's all right.
So you sign up and you get shipped off. Where's basic training?
I went to basic training boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois. I went up there in September, graduated in December of '61. And from there I went to the USS Wasp out of Boston, Massachusetts for the first 7 months. We made a North Atlantic cruise for 5 months. Out of those 7 months, we went to England, Norway, East Germany. We stopped at Iceland on the way back. We didn't get to go ashore there, but we got stopped at Iceland on the way back. And then I went to what we call A school in Bainbridge, Maryland, to learn how to be an administrative assistant called a yeoman. And from there I was transferred to Sinpac Fleet in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii for 2 years. And there I worked with the logistics people, the supply people. I worked for a Navy captain in the supply corps doing whatever he wanted me to do. I was there whenever President Kennedy was shot. And that was even though we were in Hawaii, we heard about it because it's a couple hours difference in time, but it was over there. And I remember Captain Gregg, his name was William Gregg, he yelled at me as soon as he heard that Kennedy was shot. He said, "Petty Officer Rathburn, get my stockbroker on the phone for me. I want to buy stock." So he knew what was going to happen, and he wanted to buy stock, and I don't know how much money he made, but he made a few bucks on the stock market that day. And then after 2 years in Pearl Harbor, I went to the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington, D.C. for a year. And then my enlistment was up, and I really didn't know if I wanted to stay in the service or come back home to and get a job. So I came home on 7 days leave, as we call it. I talked to my father, and my father told me that I was 21 years old, and I was in the Navy, and I seemed to be happy doing what I was doing. He said, "John Paul, you don't want to come back here and work in a factory like I and your 2 brothers are doing." He said, "I would recommend you stay in the service." So I went back and I talked to my detailer, which is the guy that sent us to where he's going to go, and he had a billet for me in Naples, Italy, or London, England, and I told him I could speak English, so I went to London, England for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And that's where I started working in naval intelligence at, and that was really a very interesting field. I helped gather information to disseminate to the fleet about our, quote, enemy, what he was going to do or what we thought he would do. We used to use all kind of different tools to do that, and I was right down to London, England. We didn't wear a uniform. The 3 years I was in London, I probably wore a uniform 5 times. Once when I got promoted, and once when I had to go on burn runs, and one time we had to stand in inspection because some big admiral came in there. Admiral John McCain was my admiral at that place, Senator John McCain's father.
Oh, wow.
And Captain John McCain, Senator McCain, was captured in Vietnam after that. And when I left London, when I was in London for 3 years, I had met a young lady that I fell in love with and married her. And we had a daughter in London. So my wife was Irish, born in Dublin, Ireland. We got married at her home church in Dublin, Ireland. Our daughter Sarah was born in London, England. And then my 3 years was up in London, so I had to go to another duty station, so they sent me to the USS Intrepid. The Intrepid was over in Vietnam at that time, so I had to fly from London clear to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines to pick the ship up. So I went from London, I came to Connersville and dropped my wife and daughter off, and then I had to go to California and flew to Subic Bay, and we got back to the States in April of 1969. And I was there in Norfolk, Virginia, where the home port was at for a couple months, and they decided they were going to decommission the Intrepid, so they sent me somewhere else, and they sent me to Yokosuka, Japan.
Oh,
so I
wow.
went to I had a duty station over there called Naval Investigative Service Office Japan. We were in Yokosuka, and my job over there was working in naval intelligence, but we didn't work on our enemy. We were doing stuff for the American sailors and other Americans in Yokosuka, especially if a sailor wanted to marry a Japanese national. We had to do a background investigation on the Japanese national to make sure that they didn't have a criminal record and could not come back to the States after they got married to the servicemen. If they had a prostitution or a criminal record, they couldn't come back. It was my job to gather information and tell that to the agent that was working the case, and to tell the servicemen whether they could or could not come back to America if they got married. If they were a criminal, they couldn't get a visa to come back with them. So we had a couple of times we had to do that. The most interesting case I had over there was we had a young lady, a Japanese national, who came in and wanted to marry somebody off of the U.S. Oklahoma City, and an LST that was homeported out in Yokosuka. We called both of the young sailors in off of their ships, and she was in another room, and we had them up so they could hear what the lady was talking about. And we told them, we got with the young lady, and we said, "You want to marry, I'll say Joe." She said, "Yes, I'll marry Joe from the Oklahoma City, but you also want to marry John from the LST." "Yes, I'll marry John from the LST." And we said, "Which one are you going to marry?" She says, "Whichever one's in port." So she didn't care who she married, as long as she could marry a serviceman to get back to America.
To get to the United States.
So I was there for 3 years doing.
Wow.
That was the most important. That was the funniest, hilarious thing I did over there. And after 3 years in Japan, I went to 4 years in Pearl Harbor again. I went to a place called FICPAC, Fleet Intelligence Center Pacific, where I was back to gathering information about our so-called enemies and disseminate to the fleet what we would guesstimate. We would guesstimate what we thought he was going to do and when he was going to do it, or how he was going to get it done, and what he was going to do to hurt us and our allies. And I was there for 4 years. That was an uneventful 4 years. Nothing exciting happened there, except I got to live in Hawaii for 4 years.
Yeah, that's
which
terrible.
was very nice.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, I did too. And then from there, I had the time to go back to sea again. So they sent me to the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, homeported down in Jacksonville, Florida. Oh. And I went and had to go. I left Naval Intelligence at that time and went back to working in the administration field of the Navy. I was called the captain's writer. Whatever the captain wanted done, I did that for him. Captain R.P. Bourdon was his name. And then we made a 7-month Mediterranean cruise while I was there. We left in October and got back in March. We left in October of 76 and got back in March of 77. And then again, they decided to decommission the Roosevelt. So I was on sea duty. So they had to send me to another sea billet. So they sent me to Norfolk, Virginia, to Commander Destroyer Squadron 2, where we had 8 to 10 destroyers in our squadron. And because I was a senior administration person, we would go to the ships before they would make a cruise, and we would check their records and make sure they had all the forms they needed to get underway, and all of what kind of reports they would make while they were underway and overseas either on a cruise in the Caribbean or in the Mediterranean or North Atlantic cruise like that. And I was there for 18 months. And then it was time to go back to sea duty or back to shore duty. And they asked me if I would stay in Norfolk. And I told them, no, I didn't want to stay in Norfolk. So they transferred me to Washington, D.C., back to the Defense Intelligence Agency, which I'd never been, but we worked out of the Pentagon. So it was my second time in the Pentagon. But my office was in Alexandria, Virginia, at what we called Pomponio Plaza. I was 2 subway stops away from the Pentagon. And I rode the subway back and forth to work every day instead of traveling in a car. So I did that there, and that's when I decided I would get out. I had some unfortunate family issues that came up there, and my wife had surgery and just about died. And it was either get out of the Navy and take care of her, or go over to Rota, Spain, which didn't have a millet. And my wife's doctor suggested I not go to Rota, Spain, because they didn't have a hospital where they could take care of her at. So I made the decision that we made the decision that I would retire and come back to Connersville, where my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters were at. So we did that, and that's how I decided to retire. And I forgot to tell you, another thing happened in Japan with my son. Our son was born there.
Okay.
So I had an Irish wife, an English daughter, a Japanese-born son, and I was an American.
Wow.
So that we had a mixed family for a while.
Yeah.
And then when I got out of the Navy, I came back to Connersville, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't want to go to work, but I had to go to work.
Yeah.
So I decided that I would go to college, and I enrolled in IU East, and on a part-time basis, it took me 7 years to get a bachelor's degree. In the meantime, I found a job working for Landmark in the north end of town, and they sent me to Brookville to work at the Watt Center, the Work Activities Training Center for the Handicapped in Brookville.
For social work?
For social work,
Okay.
Yeah. So I got a 2-year degree in social work, and I got a bachelor's degree in liberal arts. With my major is behaviors and social sciences.
Okay.
So I did with right along with my social work stuff that I did, and I worked there for 19 years before I finally retired for good in 2009.
Oh wow.
So I've been retired since Friday, April the 13th, 2009.
Wow.
And I've enjoyed every minute of it. I enjoyed being in the Navy, but I also enjoyed working at Landmark. And my wife and I had a good life. Just unfortunate she had to pass away sooner than she did. But we enjoyed what we did, and we had a good time.
Aw. So you said how did you get into the field of intelligence in the service? Is that something you wanted to get into, or did you just happen
had no idea.
to fall
I became an administration person. I became an administrator in the Navy because I could type.
Okay.
And they give you aptitude test in boot camp, and I could type 30 words a minute, thanks to Kenny Cavanaugh, the
Yeah.
teacher at Connersville.
Yeah.
I had him for 2 years and learned how to type, and that's how I got administration. And when I went to London to Thinkers Navure in '65, they detailed me to the intelligence group. I had no idea what we did at that time, even though I'd been in the Navy and worked at JCS and stuff like that. But it's a eye-opening experience when you deal with highly classified information on a daily, hourly basis.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting what our quote enemies do, and even what our quote allies do as well. Sometimes it gets really serious about what goes on, but everything works out okay. and it's really good. And then, of course, after I got in London, when I was on the Intrepid, I worked intelligence. And then when I was in Japan, we worked with the Naval Investigative Service Office, which is part of intelligence. And there at FICPAC, I worked in naval intelligence. And then back in DIA, I worked back in naval intelligence again. So out of the 20 years I spent, I had 16 years working in naval intelligence at, 5 different duty stations.
Yeah.
But it was enjoyable, and I've recommended more than once for young men and young women, if they want to go in the service, I tell them, if you're not tied to your mother's apron strings, you're not afraid to be away from home, it doesn't hurt. And you make pretty good money now.
Right.
They didn't make a whole lot of money then.
Right.
But you make pretty good money now.
Right. So can you share, like, maybe, is there a neat experience that happened to you on one of the ships that you can think about?
On a ship, every day is the same, because you go to bed, you get up, you go to work. No matter what you do, you have a job. Every day is just like the previous day. You get to sleep 8 hours a day if you're lucky. You get to eat 3 meals a day, because they always serve, on an aircraft carrier, they serve 24 hours a day. There's always a mess hall somewhere open that you can eat. The thing about my ships, they were early enough that we didn't have any recreational things like the people do today. If you wanted to lift weights or work out like that, you had to make your own way to do that, and you had to find a place to do it. They didn't have the workout room as they have today. If you wanted to go run, you had to run in the hangar bay and run around airplanes that were being repaired or maintained or whatever, or go on the flight deck. But if you run on a flight deck, you took the run the risk of being blown overboard if the wind got too hard or the ship made a hard turn real quick. So we didn't have that. We did have a library, but it was very limited. And when we had, with the University of Maryland, they had what they called the PACE program for afloat college education. You could sign up to take classes with the University of Maryland there. I took a couple of those classes then, but I didn't apply myself. So I just really didn't get a lot of it. But I know a lot of people that worked the PACE program. I didn't apply myself. Well, I did go to college when I was in Hawaii, at the University of Hawaii. I took a few extension courses over there, because I guess I was really setting myself up to retire, because I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I'd have my GI Bill, and one of the things I guess I wanted to do was get a college education. Mm-hmm. So I started doing that. So it was okay, but as far as exciting things, well, the only thing that was exciting, it wasn't really exciting. On the Intrepid, when I was in Vietnam, I worked in the Air Intelligence Office, and part of my job was to help debrief the pilots as they come back from sorties whenever they would go inland and do a bombing strife. And I remember I had to type one afternoon after the pilots were landed back on the ship and they were debriefed, I had to type that a wingman for one of the pilots named Kenneth K. Knabel started a strafing and went down in the ground and never pulled back up. He ran nose first into the ground. Of course, that killed him. Killed him there. But that was when I realized that being in the Navy in Vietnam was just not a job. It was a dangerous profession, and people were getting killed over there. And up until then, I had 6-7 years in the Navy by that time, and I'd never been in a place where they were shooting at me. I mean, I was behind a typewriter and filing papers and stuff like that. But whenever Lieutenant Knabel went down like that, it kind of made me think about, do I want to do this anymore? Or do I want to get out and go somewhere else and do something else? But I made the decision to stay in and to stick with it.
Yeah. So of all the countries that you visited, what was one of your favorites? And any of them, did you ever go back to them?
I never went back to any of the countries we visited, but I've gone back to Ireland several times. But my wife was from Ireland.
Okay.
And I still have in-laws over there. But I do go back to Ireland a few times. It's been 6 years since I was there last, but then I was going to go during COVID, and of course I couldn't go during COVID. And the last couple of times I've talked to my sister-in-law, she told me that she didn't want me to come over because I could get over it but might not get to come back. They might not let me leave the country, so she suggested I not come over yet. But she said, I'll let you know when it's safe to come over.
Aw.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Wow. I would love to go to Ireland.
And Hawaii, if I had a chance, I'd like to go back to Hawaii. I lived a total of 6 years in Hawaii, and it was very, very nice. And, you know, even though things change over there, you never get to see it all.
Right. Did you go to the different islands?
Been to 5 different islands,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. And the base
Maui.
was on
I was on Oahu,
Oahu. That's what I was thinking.
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. Okay. So have you been able to keep in touch with your military friends?
I have several people that I correspond with. They're in Virginia Beach or South Carolina or Florida. We correspond maybe at Christmas time and maybe once or twice during the summer. 3 times, maybe 3 times during the year. Facebook, with
Yeah.
Facebook being up. We talk about things every now and then too. Yeah, about 4 of them that I'm in contact with, yes.
Okay. So when you were in the service, so for mail, did you get letters?
Oh, yeah. Even though you're at sea for 30 days, they have what they call the COD, Carrier On Board Delivery,
Yeah.
an airplane that comes out every day, or not every day, but at least 3 times a week that would bring supplies and parts or mail or whatever, and even personnel. If you had somebody that was coming to the ship, they might, and especially in Vietnam, we'd pick somebody up. The COD would leave Subic Bay, Philippines, and fly out to Yankee Station and land on the ship, and you get all that stuff out. And we had mail that went out every time we had a COD. You had a mail to come out. So we always had mail. Maybe you have to go 3 days between it, but that's all right. We wrote letters, and in Vietnam we got free postage because we were in a war zone. So
Yeah.
I wrote letters all the time to my family and my wife.
Yeah.
And even when we were in the Med, when I was on the Roosevelt, we were in the Med back in 66, 67. I corresponded over there too as well, back and forth.
Okay.
And I had my 2 kids were living with my wife in Jacksonville, Florida. And my wife told me that the kids liked it when I sent them a special letter addressed to them, not to just their mother.
Aw.
So they said they enjoyed that. So I did that frequently.
Yeah. So all 3 ships you were on, you said one of the ships is now a museum, and can you tell us about that?
The USS Intrepid is a floating museum in Bayonne. It's downtown New York City. It doesn't have any engines, and they've got most of that stuff out of it. But you can visit the Intrepid. I think it's called the Intrepid Museum. I think it's online, and I've wanted to go there, but every time I get ready to go, something comes up. I don't get to make it.
Okay.
But I talked to a couple of my shipmates that were on there, and they told me that I should go because it's just like it was back then. One of my friends, Paul Coakley, him and his wife, who I corresponds with, told me they were on at one time in New York on a tour, and the tour guy was an enlisted man in the Navy, and he got tangled up what he was talking about. And Paul said, "Excuse me, sir," said, "let me tell you what
corrected him.
really happened here." And Pat said, "Paul told him what happened." That it was interesting, yeah.
So do you think if you toured that, would you be able to remember where you stayed, and would you be able to tour that whole part, do you think, or not?
I think I could find out where I was at. I know where the Air Intelligence Office is. Yeah, right underneath, well, it's not underneath the flight, 2 decks below the flight deck. And I'll bet I could find my berthing compartment pretty easy as well. Because I mean, you don't do a lot of stuff there, but you're either at your office working or you're in the berthing compartment.
Yeah.
And that's just about it. Of course, the mess decks everybody eats in the mess deck. When you have 5,000 people, the mess decks are always busy. So,
Right.
And you don't get a lot of time to eat there, but everybody gets to eat.
Right. So is the food good?
Well,
Yeah.
I never starved to death.
Yeah.
It might have been roast beef 3 days a week, but it was roast beef, and we didn't have McDonald's. And you could go to what we called the Guidon, the ship's store, and you could get a candy bar, but you can't live on candy bars. And They fill you up with carbohydrates and all that stuff because you're out there working. I mean, it's just like a job. Just because you're underway doesn't mean you can't do anything. You have to work.
Yep. And is it long days?
Well, days are only 24 hours a day, but you can work up to 16 hours a day, and that's not a problem. You can take a cat nap when you get an opportunity, or you can just work and stay in your desk. I mean, I used to take naps at my desk between sorties, as we call them, when the flights would take off and come back before they would land again. Mm-hmm. And I might have 20 minutes that I could take a nap rather than go to the compartment to go to sleep. I just put my head on my desk and take a nap there. That was all right.
Yeah. So are you glad you joined the service?
Oh, yes. I'm very glad I joined the Navy. I got to see most of the world. Mm-hmm. I've got to experience different things that people that never joined the service never got to see. I got to go places and meet different people. I mean, who had ever gone to somebody going to Oslo, Norway? And I've been there. I've been to Singapore. I've been to Australia. I've been to New Zealand. I've been to Brazil, Japan. The only thing, if you go from the Eastern Mediterranean and go east to Japan, that's the only part of the world I haven't seen.
Okay.
So that little part there. And then on the Intrepid, if I had gone in with the Intrepid when she went to Vietnam, instead of staying in London for 3 more months, I would have gone through the Suez Canal because she transferred through the Suez Canal to go from Norfolk, Virginia to Yankee Station in Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
So she went through the Suez Canal and the Indian Ocean around that way. That would have been neat. I never got through any of the canals like that.
Okay.
But that would have been neat. I did get to go through the Straits of Gibraltar. That was a neat.
Oh, wow.
That was a neat thing to see as well. But you go there early in the morning or late at night, so you want to get in and get out.
Right. So your family now, your kids, are they around here now, or where are they?
My daughter lives in Greenwood, Indiana. My son lives in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Okay.
My son joined the Navy or joined the Air Force, and he got out after 8 years due to disability and stayed in Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Okay.
So, and I understand that. My daughter lives in Greenwood. So I'm the only one left in Connersville now. Mom and Dad are both gone, and all my brothers and sisters have moved. And every now and then I ask myself, why am I still here? I mean, I came back with my wife and family to see Mom and Dad, my kids as grandparents, and my brothers and sisters.
Right.
But they're all gone. So why am I still here? I just don't know where else to go. Connersville is my hometown.
Yep.
I just don't want to leave it yet.
Right. So what do you do in all your spare time?
I keep myself busy. I take care of a house.
Okay.
I got a house. I mow the grass. I clean it up. Whatever I want to do, wherever I want to go, if it's within reason, I do it.
You can do it.
And I have a great time. I have a friend that goes with me. She enjoys doing what I do as well. We enjoy each other's company, so
That's awesome.
we go visit. And I go to Cheyenne to see my son and his grandkids and great-grandkids now. My great-grandkids now.
Yeah.
So I go out there, if I can, make it 3 or 4 times a year.
That's awesome. Well, John Paul, I want to thank you for your experience, for sharing your experience with us today. I want to thank you for your service and your sacrifice, and I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Well, I enjoyed being here. Thanks for asking me.
All right, so be sure to tune in next month for another edition of Hometown Salutes.